real disillusionment with the ideal of power. To be in power, to be in control, is not something that any sensible person wants. Imagine the situation of Big Brother. Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, Heinrich Himmler, to be glued day and night to a highly defended office with telephones, television screens, watching, peeking, spying on everyone and anything, getting all this information together. Why? You could never leave the office. I mean, the people character, I suppose, like J. Edgar Hoover, goes home in the evening, and but when he's back home, you know, there are guards sitting outside the door. There's that hotline telephone going to something. He's always having to be in control. And he can't take any time off. He can't go for a walk in the park with a friend, or go innocently to the movies, or sit down and just relax and have an undistracted party in the baths at Big Sur. Yeah, what a pauper this guy is. Completely deprived. Because he wants to be in control, because he wants power. People are frustrated in love. Be if you're jilted. There's a natural tendency in a human being to seek power as a substitute. And that's a very negative thing. It's like having a bad temper. To seek power after you're frustrated in love, you should try and get back on the love beam. Because nobody wants power. Now you may say that's shirking responsibility. That if you were a really responsible person, you would go out for power and try to use power to the best possible advantage for the benefit of all. All right, what would be the benefit of all? Ask them. What do you want me to do with this power? I'm dictator. What would you like me to do? Well, nobody knows, because they haven't thought it through. They think of all sorts of short-range things, and they are largely conflicting and confusing, because they're not well thought out. But again, when it finally comes down to it, nobody wants to be God. Now then, when Oriental philosophy and religion was first introduced to the Western world, it was introduced under the auspices of people who were fascinated with power. It was introduced in the latter part of the 19th century, when we had heard all about evolution and how the human race was going on to ever greater heights, and we would eventually develop Superman, according to Nietzsche or G.B. Shaw, and H.G. Wells. Remember all that early fantasy of where evolution would lead through the development of technology. And so at this time, people like H.P. Blavatsky were talking about the mysterious wisdom of the East. And they phrased it, they commended it to us in a technological spirit. That there was psychic technology. That there was something that you could go way beyond anything that could be done through the physical sciences. You could cause your physical body to disintegrate to another level of vibration, and then transmit it and reassemble it somewhere else. You could live as long as you liked because you control the fundamental processes. You could determine, if you decided to die, where you would be reborn, exactly. You would be a complete master of life. And so there are still innumerable books being sold which present Oriental philosophy and religion in this light. That charlatan Lobsang Rampa, who writes about Tibetan mastery. People read that because they think that there may be a way of beating the game. So therefore, the wise men of Asia were represented through this kind of propaganda as masters of life, as, for example, people whose emotions didn't bother them, who could put up with any amount of pain by simply turning off their feelings. who could foretell the future, who could read your thoughts, and who were above all kinds of ordinary human frailty. Well, when I first met Buddhist priests, Zen masters, swamis, all these wise men from the East, one of the first things that impressed itself upon me was that they were perfectly ordinary human beings. They had bad tempers. They were fussy about certain things. They just acted as I would expect human beings to act. And so at first I was very disappointed. I thought they had feet of clay, that they didn't come up to these promises of psychotechnology. But after a while I got to realize why not, that they had already thought all that through. They had thought through what might be done if one had all these powers, and had decided that wasn't what they wanted. The powers of this kind in Sanskrit are called siddhi, S-I-D-D-H-I. But there is hardly one decent scripture or text on yoga that does not say again and again, if you get siddhi, ignore them. Go on to something else. These are only the foothills. These are, furthermore, not only foothills, but they are seductive, blind alleys. Won't take you anywhere at all. Now, I think that this is the greatest possible lesson for the Western world to learn, because we are so hung up on the idea of power, of control, of being able to make everything go the right way, and we've never thought it through. When you get control of it, what are you going to do with it? Supposing I'm an alchemist, and I have a whole secret closet full of love filters, very potent ones. And if I see a desirable woman, all I have to do is to offer her a cigarette or give her a glass of wine with one of my secret potions in it. And instantly, I'm her master. Now, when I think that through, what would I do with a situation like that? Because all I've got again is that plastic doll that when I push it, it does what I tell it to and doesn't have any comeback. What you always are looking for in things is where the surprise is there, where there's a comeback. And you say, my God, this thing is alive. It has a will of its own. It is not in my control. And I would like to have a relationship with something like that, because it would never be dull. And also, you would feel true affection. After all, you can make love to yourself in a mirror. You can have one of those Dutch wives. You buy them in a place in Kobe, where you get these rubber girls that you fill with hot water. And sailors take them on long voyages. But what an awful thing, when you realize that this thing has no gear, no surprise in it, no thing that it does on its own, you see. And so when you think things through like that, you understand you do not want power. You don't want to control everything. And therefore these Zen Buddhist masters that I met and others were not super occultists. And very many Westerners who visited Japan expecting to get a satori, as a result of which they would know everything and control everything, were grievously disappointed and said there's not much in this after all. So therefore, from the standpoint of Buddhism, the fact that the power game is not the game is expressed by saying a Buddha is one who has gone beyond the gods, because the gods have power. The Buddhism imagines all kinds of levels of heaven worlds inhabited by all kinds of gods, and the supreme of all the gods is called Ishvara. But it is said that all those gods in their paradisal worlds are in samsara. They're in the round of birth and death, and what goes up must come down. They're immensely successful. They're at the peak of power, spiritual power. But they're not delivered yet, because they still don't know what they want. And therefore, in the exploration of what you want, you get to the point where having all pleasures at your command, and they pall, and you think of new sources of pleasure. And eventually you get like the ancient Romans, who had all these mad crowds of barbarians who had to go every Saturday to the Colosseum for a show that really had to surpass everything, because they had public baths, they had prostitutes, they had every kind of luxury. But when they went to see one of the big shows that people like Nero put on, they would have, for example, floats circling the Colosseum, all full of slave girls from distant parts of the Mediterranean, garlanded with flowers and waving at the crowd and going innocently around. And the next minute they would release wild lions into the arena to eat up all the slave girls. And they got a big sadistic kick out of that. Because you see, pursuing pleasure beyond a certain place takes you into what the Buddhists call the Naraka world, that is to say, the hells. When you have explored pleasure to its ultimate limit, the only thing you can get a kick out of is pain. And so naturally, you descend from the Deva world at the top of the wheel to the Naraka world at the bottom, where it shows all these beings in states of torture. Now, of course, the priests say, when they're bringing up children, if you do bad things, you will end up in the hell world. But this is a very inadequate way of showing how one gets to the hell world. You get to the hell world as a result of not knowing what you want, as a result of thoughtless pursuit of pleasure, which ends you eventually in the pursuit of pain. So when you're in the hell world, that's where you want to be. So then the question is, to clarify once more, what do we want? If you understand, first of all, that you don't want absolute power, you don't want absolute control. You want, yes, some control. Do you see, we always love controlling something that's not really under our control. Remember, I gave you the illustration right in the beginning of holding a gyroscopic top and feeling sometimes you're with it, but sometimes it's alive under your hand. And this sensation, too, you often get, say, in driving a car or something like that. It's more or less under your control, but on the other hand, it isn't. And that's the beautiful thing, because when something is partly under your control, but isn't, then you have the same sort of relationship with it that you have when you have someone you love, some other person. They are partly under your control because they've agreed to live with you and go along with you and so on, but also they're not. And the measure to which they're not is the measure to which they seem really alive to you. So then, we ask the question, if the motivation of power gaining disappears, you've seen through it and you know that's not what you want, what other motivation takes its place as the origin of actions? And it seems to me that the answer here is compassion. Simply because when you want to relate to another living being, what you really are asking of them is that they be in the same situation that you are. You want to meet and encounter someone else who has your problems, your fears, and your delights. You don't want a doll, you want another you, another self. Because that would be at least as surprising to you as you are. And so then at once, that when you see that that is the case, and that the most interesting thing in the world is the relationship with these others, and you can see at once yourself in the situation of all the other people, and then you think, no, I don't want to control these people. I would like them, yes, to be controlled in the sense that they were happy to do the things I would like them to do. But obviously I can't force that, because if I forced it, they wouldn't be happy. See, when you marry someone, when you have a family, you want your children, you want your relatives, you want your wife, etc., to be happy to do the things for you that they do. And so we say to each other, would you like to bring the washing in? And very often the answer is no, but I will. Because you see, we put it that way because we always hope that the things that we do for each other will be pleasurable to both sides. So a school teacher will get up in class and says, "What nice boy will clean the blackboard for me?" All these ways we use of trying to get voluntary cooperation, willingly given help. That's what we look for. But there is, despite the lot of foolishness that goes on, this is a sound thing, you see, that there really is no greater satisfaction that you can imagine than that kind of personal relationship wherein you can trust a being who is other than you and not under your control to do for you what you want, because they like it. As you, on your side, would want to do something for them in that way, and so as to give pleasure to the other person. Let's take in sexuality, where you get a kind of a critical example of this. The biggest fun in sexual relationships is giving orgasm to women. And if that doesn't happen, many men feel disappointed. Because the thing that they really wanted to do was to give pleasure and get their own pleasure out of giving it. Now that's compassion, in the real sense of the word, feeling with and through someone else. Where the whole trick is that you lose control for a while of the situation and say, I throw the ball to you, now it's yours. Now, I may seem, therefore, as a result of talking in this way, to be talking like a Jewish or a Christian theologian. Because that's what they say about God. That God did something called kenosis in the beginning of all time. Kenosis is a Greek word meaning self-emptying, self-sacrifice, giving up, and thereby conferred freedom of will and the power to love on angels and human beings. And therefore took a terrific risk by trusting the other, by trusting a principle called other that's not under your control. With God, of course, it is ultimately under his control, but he sits back and smokes a cigar sometimes and lets it go. See what the children will do. Like DeLorde in Green Pastures, a big cigar. So, but you see, it's really, in a way, the same idea as the Hindu idea. When the Christian speaks of God giving the creature freedom of will, the Hindu says, no, God gets lost in that person and gives up power. And it's really the same thing. It's the idea that the all-powerful surrenders power. So that the more you give the power away, what you're really doing is you're othering yourself. Now, the more you other yourself by giving power away, the more of a self you are, because self and other are reciprocal. So you find that people who, through a sadhana, a yoga discipline, have overcome their ego, have transcended the ego, are tremendously strong personalities. You would think, theoretically, they would all be non-entities, and to lack entirely what psychologists call ego strength. But actually, they're nothing of the kind. They are, every one of them, unique. They're all quite different from each other. And they are very, very, what I would call strong characters. Because the more they have given it up, the more they get it. So, in this way of thinking, let's put it in another dimension for the moment. Let's suppose we are thinking of a relationship that is not just to people. People are very obviously other and independent of one's ego. But give it to everything. Say to everything, which in course is going to include as much of yourself as you can objectivize. In other words, your stomach, your intestines, your everything, see? Say to it all, now it's your turn. Let's see what you're going to do. Let it happen. You know, you do this complete let-off of control. And you find that I have to put it in a provisional way first. You get the sensation that that everything else is living you. It lives you. That you've given away control, you see, to everything else. It's a lovely, irresponsible state to be in.